Yeah, well, you know, that's like just your opinion, man.
Welcome. I think I pulled it off just in the nick of time. Got that intro started. Thanks everyone for joining me. A couple of new faces, a couple of old faces. Nice to see everybody. Presumably nobody's got anything better to do tonight. I was almost didn't make it. Actually had to look into do a site survey out in the middle of nowhere where I couldn't even email anybody. So thanks for coming in at the last minute. Everybody knows the rules here. We're going to have a couple of polls. We're going to talk about some stuff and see what happens. Hopefully we get on something interesting. Here's our first poll. And hopefully you guys can see that. The poll is, for those who can't read it, what in the world is happening right now? Beats me, I've never known. It's all going to hell in a handbasket. I think things are going to turn around. What's happening? Not much has changed for me. Had enough and I'm moving on. So let's see what sort of attitudes everybody has today. 9 of 10. I think we almost have everybody there. 10 of 10. And the poll, share the results. Well, we got a bit of a tie, looks like. Beats me, I've never known or cared, and had enough and moving on. Well, that works for me. That's just a test poll anyway. That's not the real poll. We're going to do the real poll. Get rid of this one. Moving along quickly so we can talk more. How do I do a poll? Somebody help me here. Oh yeah, polls. There we go. I got to go back to this thing. I'm the worst. I really shouldn't be running this thing.
Bring up the Princess Bride. That'll do it.
Yeah, I know. So I click on
We're just going to play it for an hour instead of talking. Is that what's happening?
You know,
we are the audio commentary of the Princess Bride.
I really shouldn't be running this.
We could do it like Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I was.
That would be awesome.
As long as I'm Inigo Montoya.
Who are the two head silhouettes? I vote for Pete, Erskine, and Brian.
See, Brian was so much better at this. You know, he always had something Princess Bride related that always made us laugh. Okay, here's our topics for today. I've got it solved. We got what shall we talk about? Once again, all-in-one consoles or with DSPs built in or separate consoles and DSPs? Do we care about external word clocks? Is this a thing? Does anybody care? Is wireless going to disappear? This is something that Jason and others have been talking about. And do we think the next big thing is hybrid events or live-only events, or is it going to be some sort of thing that's happening now that people can't come to audience, or you can't get audiences together, or what do you think about that? And what is going to happen to the world of live shows because of all this COVID stuff? So not everybody has voted yet. It's hard to tell if everybody's sick of talking about COVID yet or not. Seems to be it's on everybody's mind because it certainly affects our business, but it's also the only thing anybody talks about. So perhaps we'll have something else to talk about today. I need one more vote. Anybody get? I'm missing one vote. Everybody voted? There we go. Oh my gosh. So we actually got a three-way tie. Okay. Consoles, DSP separate consoles, wireless going away, or hybrid or live only events.
Did you vote, Andy?
I can't vote, unfortunately. So
okay, so you're the
tiebreaker, right?
Well, I think the tiebreaker should be the person who wanted to speak about COVID, because we certainly covered that topic.
We covered that in the pre-show talk.
Or do we do the one that gets no votes?
And then just steer it somewhere else. You know, Mac and I have been wanting to talk about consoles for a while. So we're going to talk about all-in-one consoles with DSPs built in, or separate consoles and DSPs, and probably the topic will turn to something else because there's only so much we can say about that particular topic.
In two responses.
And go ahead, Mac.
I'm not starting this.
Come on. Well, you know,
definitely separate DSP.
Separate DSP. So let's see
Me too.
which boards have it
It's
done
just-
that way.
It's just asking for a crisis to try and do it in the console. The minute the console shits the bed, everything's gone. It's just too risky.
But that was the same argument that came up when the first digital consoles arrived, replacing big analog hardware boards and outboard racks. And the world didn't end.
The
You forgot
analog
the Innovason.
world
You don't
ended.
remember the Innovason, do you?
Well,
I would also say that it depends on what we're talking about here. For me, doing some of these install projects that I've been working on in my free time these days, I want to do system tuning in a separate DSP speaker processor or something, lock it out so that all the random people who walk into that theater can't just sit there and jack with the processing to what they think is right, and then give them all of the console processing to do whatever they want with, because at the end of the day, you restore that console file and the system goes back to sounding where it was when we commissioned it.
You hesitated to say good. You sounded like you were headed to saying that the system goes back to sounding good, but then you changed it.
To where we commissioned it, yeah. Because I can't necessarily make your dome go away.
You can't change the law of physics with your design. It's too bad.
We're already derailing the topic.
Couldn't take
Because
long.
I got a lot to say about that.
No doubt.
but then that goes to the argument of whether the system processing belongs in the console or whether it belongs in an LM44 somewhere.
Well, I think they stuck it in the console because it was less expensive to do so. And I've always appreciated having the two items separated. Just gives you so much more control. And generally, if the box that's doing DSP doesn't have a GUI, I think it's less likely to crash. It's probably can be written in a more efficient way, and it can keep running. And I've seen certainly some of these systems where you can reboot the console and the sound doesn't change, the audio doesn't do anything until the console's back online. You can run it by, we all know how these things work, but it seems like there's still two different ways that they're building consoles. So in terms of which companies are doing which, right? So Allen and Heath has a separate DSP and console. Yamaha now has separate DSP and console, but they didn't for a long time. Maybe the PMD, I guess the PMD might have been that way. It was hard to tell, but it had a lot of cabling issues. Oh, was it? Okay. So it had tons of cabling issues. I mean, you couldn't, it was a bit of a different sort of breed at that time. Avid is in the console or in the DSP?
S6L is, Profile's not.
Okay, so they have two different possible ways, right? Digico, it's in the console, right?
All in one.
All in one, yeah. What's the other ones? SSL?
All in one.
All in one, okay.
Caddic.
All in one.
Damn.
So I wonder why they're leaning that way. And these are expensive consoles where it doesn't really, sometimes it's cheaper to put everything in one box to build it that way. But if you're looking at some of these higher end consoles where cost is not so much a factor, reliability would be a big, and convenience and configurability would be more important. I wonder why they're still putting them all in, why they're still doing the all in one.
Well,
I have one answer for that.
Hmm?
R&D cost. It is very expensive to come up with a controller that can control a piece of hardware separately.
But you have a chance to do it again and again and again with larger and
Yeah,
smaller.
but it's dollars.
Hmm.
Well, we all tend to forget that Yamaha actually did this early on with the DSP 5D. You could have your cake and eat it too. You could have a DSP, you could have PM5D that was a one-stop shop, and it could control the DSP 5D, and the 5D surface could go up in smoke, and the DSP 5D would keep chugging along. And that was a huge market failure.
Well,
Why
you
would you
needed
say it
a
was a
splitter.
failure? I
You had to
think
split
they
all
sold
the
a few of those.
inputs separately, though. So it wasn't practical. And the PM1D was the same way. To have perfect redundancy, the PM1D needed a passive splitter too.
I was just going to
No, it
say,
didn't.
what
PM1D, you could have two DSPs, and it was a seamless switchover between the DSPs.
Yeah, but
All you
nobody
had to
ever
do-
ran it that way.
I did. You
you?
had to use an external clock because you had to clock
Mhm.
you had to clock the two DSPs off the same clock, and you couldn't loop them because, of course, then if DSP1 fails, there's no clock on at all on DSP2. So you had to have, like a Big Ben or something that clocked both DSPs. But that's the way we always set them up for Broadway.
I was going to say, I was just going to say real quick, what do you, I think my bigger question in this is, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to accomplish complete redundancy? Because that's one thing, or are you just trying to deal with reliability of the surface and DSP itself? Because they're two different issues.
I think it's a flexibility. If you have a separate DSP and controller, you can control it any which you want. I use these boxes where sometimes you don't have room to have a mixed position. So you have a tablet or you have something else, but then you do have room sometimes, and sometimes you want to have a front house position. Sometimes you want to have a side stage. Sometimes you want to be in a different room. There's a bunch of different ways. When you have the two things separated, you can do it any way you want, and you can add on to it. You can expand the whole system. I like the idea of, much as, Allen and Heath is not necessarily a pro product, the idea that you can expand the system by adding more boxes and adding more IO without having to change the DSP, I think it's kind of a good idea, a good design, I think, and I think having that flexibility just makes it easier.
For me, it's just it's a question of workflow. Like I've had just as many loudspeaker processors fail as I have consoles. Maybe arguably more loudspeaker processors than consoles, but it's just a workflow thing. Like, is it a festival? Is it a venue is it a Madison Square Garden venue that is forcing people to use their PA? Is it, what is the application of the system? Is it an install like Joe mentioned? Or is it a really large corporate show with 3 or 4 consoles, or is it a radio show that's also a broadcast? Like, what is the application? Because I've done some systems that you cannot drive with external DSP unless you're going to use DSP in the amplifiers. And it just to try to do a drive system that can support, say, like 30 speaker zones, you're not going to do that with a bunch of LM44s. I'm sorry. Maybe Galileos, but how many backup Galileos do you need for a system like that? And how long will it take to swap it out? Whereas if the console fails and you're using a huge matrix in a SD7, for an example, that's much easier to swap out than, some Galileo and a catwalk somewhere. So I think it just depends.
Very true, but you can also take the SD7s, and if you wanted redundant, you can mirror them.
Yeah, exactly. So it just comes down to the design.
Yeah.
Except
I'm just going to argue that having toured with a D5 with a redundant engine and had to deal with all of the shenanigans there, and even the shenanigans that we run into at Wolf Trap, trying to keep the mirrors correct between the two SD7 engines, it's still not a perfect system. It still creates glitches between the two engines.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's the application of what that drive signal flow should look like for a particular, application. To me, I've done it all the ways. And I've done it differently in all the ways because there's no situation that's really the same. Is it an A-list band that you are bringing a PA system in because of? That's a very different situation than a broadcast situation with 20 bands, and that aren't allowed to retune. They can bring their own speaker processors if they want, but the PA is the PA. So, in my opinion, it matters, but I don't think there's a right answer for all applications.
No, but I was thinking of the idea that, let's say you had to purchase your own for some reason. Would you prefer to purchase something that's separate, or would you prefer to purchase something that's, if you need to be able to cover a whole bunch of different types of events, what's something that kind of fits the bill for everything?
There isn't anything, because if you're a regional sound company supporting fairs, 2 LM44s is all you need.
Okay.
But if you're a corporate company doing tons of really big systems, or a festival company doing tons of clusters and delay clusters, that drive system's probably not the right choice.
Right.
So, or are you a touring band using local PA every day? So I think it depends again,
Fair enough. Clive, you look like you had something to say.
When I'm touring, I have the honor of usually using the house or an external PA wherever I go. And I always carry a couple of sound webs with me, because that's my only defense against what I'm supplied with every day. But at the same time, I still think that each audio system in general needs its own DSP. It should be part of the speaker system, really. I mean, broadcast radio shows, yeah, that's a different matter, and that's what Matrix is for. But I think in terms of a show speaker system, the DSP belongs to it and should be dealt with separately from any console activities, which really should be for mixing, not for having to repair what's going on audio wise with the system,
I totally agree. And even to the point of obviously having switching systems so that you don't even have to have everything going through a particular console. You can have it kind of isolated, and the DSP and the switching system. And then now you've got your console that's set up from the last show that you did, and you can just send the signals to the system, and if everything's aligned properly and working, sounding good, you should have your show together. To spend a whole bunch of time, as you say, aligning the system.
And I found at festivals, sometimes the headliners get really itchy about having to send their feeds through another desk, and they want to be straight into the rig, So multiple desks on big festivals, it's a problem if you don't have a system DSP.
What was the XL8? Was it separate or not?
Separate, but
separate?
Analog only. So.
The XL8?
Oh, I thought you were talking about
the Midas XL8. Was it
XL88
separate DSP or not?
The XL8 was, I believe, had a separate brain.
Okay.
I believe.
Clive brings up a good point, though, and that is loudspeaker manufacturers have gotten to the point, and the technology has gotten to the point where they are providing the tools in a consistent manner when it's deployed correctly. So like if it's a modern JBL system, you're supposed to use modern amplifiers that give you control of the PA system in that kind of manner. Acoustics, and they all have filters made for their system specifically.
Exactly.
Meyer,
DMB are the first ones probably to do that.
Yeah. And probably
modern JBL amps have Covernet on,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
nothing more modern than Covernet.
We had a JBL system installed with drive packs with Covernet cards, and one of the Covernet cards died, and we called up JBL and we were like, hey, can we get a new card? And they're like, oh, we don't even make that card anymore. So they had to go like cobble one together to send it to us on a system they had just installed, like within a year. It was good luck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, JBL are very bad for that. We stopped installing JBL and just stuck with Meyer pretty much, because next year it could be totally different. or the same series of boxes would sound and perform totally differently.
Mhm.
But Samsung now, right?
Omar,
loud is your phone?
Haven't heard you speak up about this particular topic. I know this is a hot one for you. Are you still there, Omar? Or you look frozen?
I don't really know what's going on with DSP, so I was actually researching it as you guys are talking to learn about it. And
No
my
worries.
questions are super generic right now because from what I'm reading, obviously, which is the highlights of it, right?
Well, the
So,
rule
like-
is everybody has to speak, so you got to say something about the
That's
topic
fine.
or
So
ask a question or do something.
My first question then is prior to DSP coming out, and only because I've read 3 different things now that kind of mention it, but they don't really specify anything. When it was just analog, when you had to do multiple microphones and do mix minus on them and mute mics and or gate them is the word I would keep reading. What did you do for the analog days before DSP came out?
A lot of movement, a lot of turning knobs and things.
Yeah, in the analog days that go back before Dugan's, it was a lot of finger action.
Okay.
But Dugan's
go back pretty
long
far
way.
though, Mac.
Me?
The Dugan D goes back pretty far.
Yeah, I was just saying the Dugan D goes back pretty far.
That's basically an analog device.
Yeah, I mean, that was an insert device on many PM4000s.
Yep, had a dual point insert.
Yeah.
And what about gate and compression? What was that? How did you guys manage that before? And this comes from someone who does very little audio, but that's kind of my go-to when I'm doing, conference rooms or breakout rooms or rooms with a bunch of, microphones and stuff. Those are my go-to just to real quick get the room up and running and kind of make sure there's no feedback at least. How would you handle that? Like, for example, it's something that I do a lot of, which I know people hate, but when it comes to no feedback in a room with like 12 people, if I have to do it, I do it. I add a gate and a compressor on each one of my inputs so that I don't get any feedback essentially because it does it for me or at least manages it better for me. What did you guys do in analog days? Was it just a lot of fading again or was
Well,
there
there were Dugans. Back when Dugans cost $14,000 for 8 channels and required insert cables. And then if you had to have any other effect also inserted on that channel, you had to decide which way you wanted them daisy chained because they had to go on the same loop because analog consoles, except with the very rare exceptions, only had one insert point per input strip. I think CADX had 2.
There was many a show back in the old analog days where the processing rack was bigger than the desk.
Much bigger.
Big double wide racks.
Heavier.
Full
even with
costs a lot more too.
H3000s, which was pretty heavy. If you have a triple wide processing rack, it's going to weigh even more.
Omar, a good example of consoles versus audio loudspeaker DSPs is like a vision switcher into a screen switcher. It's very, very similar kind of analogy.
Okay. That's a good analogy for me.
Which is exactly what we do. We have a big vision switcher that goes into 2 analog way screen switchers.
Okay.
And just to not leave with the impression that compressors and gates started with the digital world, audio compressors date back to the 1950s. There were analog compressors, there were analog gates. They were pretty terrible, but they were really terrible. But that kind of technology existed in the analog world.
But was it a separate unit that had to be brought in?
Yeah. Every channel pretty much was a separate unit.
You had to pre-choose what you wanted. Yeah, you had to pre-choose because it took you like 5 minutes per input to plug everything in and be ready for the band. So we would spend hours.
You wouldn't do it again.
And at a festival, you had to swap your inserts while the MC was talking between acts, right? Run around the back of the desk and start plugging and unplugging shit like crazy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and the great thing about that was if you look back to the analog days and you look now to the modern digital days where you have plugins and you can do strings of plugins for days because you have the DSP to do it. You got to look back to the old analog days when you go, oh, well, look, I got a rack, but I have 8 compressors or maybe only 4 and 4 gates. And you got to choose how you use those. That's all you have.
And you may not have enough insert cables.
Yes, exactly. So you have to partition what you want to do and where you want to do it and how you want to do it. And I kind of actually value that a lot, because looking now into the digital age, if you approach it the same kind of way, yeah, sure, you've got tons of plugins, but if you approach it the same kind of way and you keep things, I guess, as simple as they can be, you look at your latency, and you can definitely improve on your latency because you're not putting so many plugins on, and there's a purity to what you can get out of it. So
don't do something just because you can. Just do it because you need to.
So when DSP came out, or now it's everywhere, but when DSP was coming out, is it safe to say that DSP made the entry to become an audio engineer easier for the next generation prior to the previous?
Digitally controlled analog circuits were the first, like Varicurves and DN 3600s.
Is that the one?
Did I get that right?
And show consoles.
Yeah. There was a DN 3600, which was a digitally controlled, analog circuit.
It like clicked.
And the TC electronics.
That was fully digital though, Mac.
Was it?
Was that?
Yeah, because it had some latency to it.
Did that come up before the Broadway? And remember the Broadway, the Soundcraft Broadway console? Digitally
oh my God, that's an anchor from the past.
They sold one or two.
I think the show console came out first, which was basically a modified Harrison.
Okay.
First, but correct me if I'm wrong, the first DSPs we really saw, like microchips and audio gear, were probably VCA control, VCA assignment control, right?
Yeah, I mean, the old CADAC, the only thing that was computerized about it was routing to VCAs, basically. Yeah, that whole
the
H3000
too, right?
Yeah, exactly. The H3000, well, the PM3000 before that.
The PM3500 had MIDI controllable mutes. That was I think a very early version of, in addition to the DCAs, which I think were pretty straight ahead VCAs. That was the first time I'd ever remember seeing something I could talk to with a computer on a console.
It was very scary.
Worked like a champ.
It did.
Until it got wet.
We did a production of the musical 1776 at Constitution Hall with actual members of Congress in the cast. And I had just bought a PM3500, and that MIDI controllable mute system really worked like a champ for that one show.
Wow.
Well,
remember the MIDI DAs?
No.
Come on.
Were you a keyboard guy?
Yes, I do.
No, you would take I still use them to this day. Like if you're using a lot of outboard, like in theater, a lot of outboard effects, you can take MIDI commands from scenes and then just DA it to processor,
Right. Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Why are you still using outboard effects? What's that?
Oh boy, here we go. This is where separate DSP is required.
Go ahead. Enlighten me.
Hey guys, I got to run, but I'll catch y'all later.
See you, Rittenhouse.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.
This gets into a whole world that I find actually very dangerous as well. But like, I was running a show at a theater here in town, and to make my life easier, rather than having to like chase multiple surfaces to actually fire cues, I set it all up so I MIDI'd my QLab system to the console. I had a go button on the console that fired the QLab system. It also fired console automation so that I had like consistent fades every night. Like I was still there to grab handles if I needed to, but I was accused of basically witchcraft for using MIDI by all of the people who were substantially older than me in the theater who did not understand that
MIDI is
technology
king.
from the 1970s still works and still works well.
And LTC's from like 1948 or something.
We
Well-
did go through a whole to-do because the lighting console also accepted MIDI, and we were discussing between the light board operator and myself the fact that we could but shouldn't connect the two via MIDI.
Time code the
And
whole show. Yeah.
could essentially have one person hitting go, triggering all of the, all the automated portions of all the shows. Yeah.
I understand all that, but you said external outboard effects. You're still using outboard effects, Peter?
Who, me?
Yeah. Didn't you say MIDI?
Yeah.
MIDI things for outboard effects. What
Yeah.
outboard effects are you still using?
The TC 6000, I believe it is.
Okay.
The controller, Lexicon 9000s, 480s.
Just because you have them, or because
because they sound better, way better than anything on M2, Bricasti M2s. There's no digital emulator that can sound as good as a actual M2.
Okay.
So yeah.
And a lot of Broadway sound designers do that, both for the sound, but also often for a necessity, because they're using so much of the onboard DSP that they don't actually have DSP to use the internal effects. And then they also have their feelings about like the Digico internal effects racks. But
yeah, exactly. I mean, but like in general, all those devices have specific sounds. So there's like a speed to using them as well. So like when you recall like whatever gated drum reverb in the 9000, you don't have to do anything basically but turn it on and maybe some EQ, and it just is, you're done.
It's just correct right off the get-go.
It's just correct. And the 6000 have some, so you're kind of using them.
Is so great for vocals too.
Oh yeah, and choruses and stuff. It just, the depth is amazing. And you can, and I don't know why it is, maybe Clive, I don't know why onboard effects are so hard on the same CPU as an audio console, except for, I think it has to do with maybe different clocks, and the clocks aren't aligning, and that clock in that CPU for that effects unit is dedicated to render out the reverb trails and stuff. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think so. I think it's purely the amount of DSP that rendering those kinds of effects properly is really hard to do. It takes a huge amount of computation. If it's dedicated, they can do it in a really efficient way. But if it's a general DSP in a desk, it just kills the desks, that's why most of the especially reverb and time-based effects that come packaged with the desks are usually pretty horrible. I mean, sometimes they're okay for a simple usage, but you can't get a sound like a 6000 out of any reverb on it built into a desk that I know of. Not even close.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing that came close was that, do you remember when Lexicon made a MADI outboard reverb unit that you could plug into a Studer and you could control it on the Studer screens?
Yeah,
that's the closest.
I don't think very many of them ever got sold.
I think MSI owned the only two, maybe. Oh, and maybe Claire owned two more.
Well, and then they came out with the Lexicon card. They just put into the Studer.
Not the same. But like all the emulators, like in Waves, not close. They're close, not exact.
Is the Silk, for example, on the PM, is that an analog thing on the preamp?
Yeah, it is. It is on the preamps. I don't know.
I know it's in the preamp.
I don't know if the
card,
processing is analog, but it's
analog or not.
It's definitely prior to any of the digital routing in the preamps.
It's definitely an emulation, but I would think it's probably got its own dedicated little bit of DSP there, because it's in the input cards. It's not.
I believe it is in the card.
It's definitely in the cards, because if you don't have the RP, whatever that is, if you don't have the big card frame, you don't get Silk processing. In Dante, Rios over the Dante network don't have Silk.
Well,
Right. It's just an interesting idea that they put
Is
it
it-
there as opposed to putting it into the console itself.
Isn't-
If it's
isn't-
Well,
all
I think
digital.
they are actually controlling the voltage. I think they are affecting the voltage on the op amps.
Okay. It makes more
Somewhat.
sense
I think
that
it's
it would have some
emulated
kind of
plus that.
analog connection.
There
Silk,
is, yeah.
Silk is built into the outboard, the one rack space Neve mic pre's, which are all analog in to out, aren't they? So that's an entirely analog process.
That was my
Yeah,
understanding, but I don't know.
But
that
I
for
think
sure.
if you read the Yamaha lit closely, you'll see that they do use the word emulation.
Okay.
Well, we've
So
got a world where everybody thinks that they can emulate a twin reverb mic'd with a U87, but they can't emulate a 480X reverb, an entirely digital process. But you can do a fine job of emulating this analog process. I find a really big discontinuity in that kind of thing.
Me too. I don't understand what the problem is.
So the other point to point out there is that they do have, I believe, non-silk cards that you could buy for the
Yes.
RPIOs.
They're cheaper.
Cheaper, and that there is a Rupert Neve designed transformer on the front end of that hybrid microphone preamp, as they're calling it. But they're also discussing the VCM technology on the card that helps create it. So there's probably a mixture of analog and digital
absolutely
processing on there.
Well, you guys that know Digico, didn't Digico stop doing the digitubes and now they do it internal, like digitally? They don't do it on
Yes.
the card anymore. Is that correct?
I believe you can no longer get the card. It's now
They're
you have
emulating
a lot
it in the
more of
strip
them.
now, right?
Yeah, in the head
And
amp.
has anybody ever compared the two, or anybody care?
No one cares.
No one uses it.
I
I use it, but I don't care that much.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I had a Digitube analog, like the analog card that went into the SD rack on one of my Broadway shows, and I couldn't tell you that I heard that thing working night by night. But again, we never A/B'd it against anything. The sound designer just said, "Hey, I need this toy," and they got that toy.
Turn it on. That's the sound. Done. You had anything to say about this, Peter? I haven't heard from you in at least an hour.
Well, the DSP I'm related to is in the intercom world, and to tell the truth, I actually use very little of it, because who cares about the quality of the audio on intercom as long as you can understand what's being said.
I
All right,
really
get
do.
out of here. Get out of here. Get out of here.
Yeah, Pete wasn't here the day that we discussed that I was going to maybe get one of those Allen and Heath AHM 64s and put it in line on all my 4 wires in and out of the Riedel.
Well, Mac did that with his Riedel system on the Clinton shows. Ran the entire Riedel system through a console,
through a Studer.
I just
warmed it up.
I've done a number of these remote studio settings where maybe some of the 4 wires coming in were not quite as volume balanced as I would have liked them to be from remote locations.
I did it from lack of familiarity with the console. It was the first show I'd ever done on the Studer, and I didn't realize you could do point-to-point routing between D21 boxes. So I just routed everything through the console because the console has 300 channels. So why not? So I had a whole layer that was just the send volume and the return volume for each of my 17 PL 4 wires. And if anybody was having trouble hearing, I could just hit a layer button and go, here, did I tweak that for you?
And only occasionally did the comm channel get on live audio.
Only occasionally.
Actually, last night on NBC News from Tokyo, they were having the level on the with going up and down, and you heard the technician. It sounds okay from here. What are you doing over there? I don't know if you heard that, but somebody
was that
with pushing the wrong button.
The Olympics.
Yeah.
Geez.
I'm pretty sure that was Brian striking.
It could have been. It could have been. I'm done here.
Yeah, I gotta go watch the Gilmore Girls. how do those two systems even be, they should have completely separate paths. Why is that? Why is it even a thing where it can be done?
Well, it wasn't his commentator system. This was network TV that was routing stuff in the wrong place. So,
my gosh.
I mean, I've definitely done. Let me rephrase that. I've definitely seen a number of concerts where the shout system got routed into the. Oh, see you, Riley. Got routed into the PA accidentally. I think a monitor engineer trying to get a hold of the front of house engineer, and the front of house engineer tried to hit PFL and instead hit unmute. And suddenly the monitor engineer is screaming at the whole audience about something.
I think that's perfectly appropriate if the front of house guy wasn't paying attention.
Back in the early days of TV, one of the first shows they did that was nationwide was See It Now. And their first show was they opened with a split screen of the Statue of Liberty and the Golden Gate Bridge. And they went on from there. And sometime during the middle of the show, they cut to Mount Rushmore. And very clearly you heard somebody say, cue the buffalo. So got to keep your comm out of the show. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, SA buttons are very dangerous.
We have a button at my day job that people have been getting mad at me because I took it off some of the comm panels, but there's might be called CA. It's a function within an atom that is call all, and it calls all the buttons
to the left,
like all the ports.
Calls all the buttons to the left of the call all button. And the guy who set up the system put a call all button at the end of all the codecs, because we use the comm system to talk back to the codecs, which are how we make all our Zoom calls. And there's 12 of them. And he put the call all at the end, except some of those 12 are used as outbound only to the audience. And
oops.
Yeah, exactly. So you hit the call all button and then you're being broadcast. And so I started taking the call all buttons off the panels. And then I got a lot of
That's why they make 10 fingers.
Exactly. We only have 12. We only have 12 codecs. You can push all the buttons on your panel you need.
So the comm system's completely, like the buttons completely programmable that you give to directors and different people like that you can set up. They can only have control of certain things.
Oh yeah.
That's the nice thing about the new intercom systems. They are so flexible.
Right.
You can go into any show and be confident that you can solve any problem that they come up with in the middle of the show.
If you're
or you can go into
in
any
system.
show and be confident that you can screw up every show.
Well, I do my fair share, but I like to keep it as complicated as possible.
Yeah, our system is fairly complicated. We talk to the talent through the intercom, but we can't listen to them through the intercom because our system's not big enough. We don't have enough
inputs
into it. So
even if you did, you just don't want to tell them that.
Well,
he wants to listen to what they have to say.
Well, I mean, if we had them, that's the smart way to do it. It's the way it's done in broadcast TV studios. But we talk to them from the intercom, and what it does is when you push that button, it sends out. There's only one output, talkback output, and it goes to my console. But it also sends a GPI signal that then turns on the talkback function of a particular channel. So each one of the outputs of each one of the intercom buttons has a specific GPO output that turns on the talkback function of whichever mix minus it is they're trying to talk to. And then the console does the ducking and the routing to get that signal out of the mix minus. And it works great, but it's a little complicated to set up. But it's a studio. You just take whatever time it takes you to set it up. Doesn't matter that it's complicated.
Keeping things complicated is good job security.
So
Yeah.
how do you normally listen to the talent if you
listen off of the SDI video coming back. So
well, then they have to be live.
no, they don't.
Oh, okay. You're listening to the
Comes into the
separate
listen.
video channel.
Yeah, I can mute it in my console, and then the director and the producer and the AD have video switcher panels, and they just switch to whichever channel they want to talk to, and then they hear the response, the pre-fade listen
But
of
it
it.
doesn't come out of their comm panel.
No, it comes out of a Blackmagic
Right.
monitor panel, which is what the video router sends it to.
Okay.
Sounds like you need more DSP in there.
There's a lot of DSP in that room.
So I don't know if I got everybody's actual opinion. Hands
Well,
up.
I didn't actually get to it with all my Falderoy I was talking about, but personally, I'd rather have everything integrated in one box.
Would you?
Keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go on a show just from the standpoint even of intercom, you go on a show, you're not entirely sure exactly what's going to happen in every situation. And if it's all in one box, you can dial up anything you want at any point. Now,
I think
of
that was
course,
sort of my point.
It may not satisfy P-Dub's sensibility of the quality of the audio, but then the audience can't understand that either. So it really doesn't matter. So
yeah, I mean, and that's sort of my point when with the like a large distributed convention center audio system is much more reliable if you don't use any outboard processing. And it's okay if you use processing in something that's native to the PA, like the amps or whatever.
Separate, right?
But to take outputs out of a console into a 20 Galileos is not a reliable way to drive a system that big.
No, that you would do with a Dimitri.
Also not reliable. There's too many failure points.
On the Tonight Show, we had a double wide rack, maybe 3 feet of rack space in it. So maybe 6 feet total of rack space full of nothing but Dimitri.
Wow.
The other thing too,
But again,
on an install, the DSP, the inputs from the console on the DSP are only a small fraction of the inputs into the system. So there might be 4 inputs from the console, but there's 20 coming from other locations, and those other 20 inputs have to work even if the mixing console's turned off.
And you need multiple ways to control things, or possibly simplified controls. Is a little panel that can turn something on and turn something off, and that's all you can do. If everything was in one box or everything's in one console, for example, you can't control it that easily. Right?
But also,
my goodness
install,
gracious! Look who's decided to join us, folks, from the land of the Olympics.
Oh my God!
Brian
It's the middle of the night.
Sleepy.
I thought we didn't let people in after the.
Well, making a
Hi,
small.
Brian.
Yeah. Hi, Brian. You look.
Oh, good. He didn't hear us all talking bad about him.
Oh, he was still trying to get his audio to work.
This whole audio thing is very confusing. And apparently it's all in Japanese. I don't really understand Japanese very well, so I'm very easily confused. Good grief, you got like a whole gang here.
A bunch of people. See, when you don't show up, everybody else does.
See, well, thanks for that. That's awesome.
Thanks for joining. What time is it there?
It's actually not that. It's actually 9:45 in the morning. So not completely reasonable. I would actually have probably been able to join it at the beginning, except I've been working night shift, so I don't get done till like 1 or 2 in the morning. So yeah. So I literally just woke up.
No, you were on Facebook when we started. We're monitoring your Facebook feed.
No, I wasn't. So maybe it's just
Joe?
was showing that I was.
Well, there was a green ball next to his name. I'm just saying.
Oh,
He fell asleep on his computer. It was still on.
That's a real
Still logged
possibility
in.
because it is not an exaggeration to say that I woke up and I looked at my messages and Foley had said, hey, the gang,
Where's the gang?
large group,
today?
whatever. Basically, you should join or whatever. And so I was like, I looked at the time and went, okay.
Rittenhouse and Riley have already checked out.
Yeah, they said if Brian's not going to be here, we're out of here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that didn't happen. But
But we've only got 10 minutes left. So Brian, I know you're fairly verbose. So what do you think about
what is it you're trying to say?
all-in-one DSPs versus separate DSPs and consoles? Which do you prefer? That's the topic today.
And he has the benefit of not knowing anything we said for the last 45 minutes.
That's right.
Right. The benefit slash trap of not knowing.
There's no right answer.
But I'm sure that there is, and I'm sure that plenty of you have come up with it. So are you talking about speaker DSP? What are you talking about?
Consoles.
Well, and I think this is the confusion that I had at the beginning of this, and I feel like a few others might have fallen into that trap too. I thought we were talking about doing your speaker processing on the console versus off the console.
Ooh,
but apparently you all were talking about having a separate brain from your console versus tucked neatly into the console.
Then reverbs on the console versus off the console.
Yeah.
So you got three different possible things that this question could be.
No, four, because then we talked about intercom as well.
There's been a lot
of
DSP on intercom.
I don't even know how that got into it, but okay.
You have a framework.
And if you talk about intercom, it's like centralized versus non-centralized systems, two completely different mindsets. Okay. So speaker processing doesn't belong in consoles. Full stop. That's an easy one to answer.
Agrees on that.
Everybody knows that.
No question there.
That's no question there. What was the other one? I guess we were talking kind of like waves rigs versus like built-in processing, like that sort of thing.
Well, think about the new Ravage, right? It's got a separate DSP from the control surface, or even Alan Heath does that, and then some of the other consoles, the Digico, everything's inside the console.
I am a big fan. I have always been a big fan since the PM1D of the concept of putting the brain in a box and the surface in a box. I've always thought that there was just an inherent internal logic to that was superior to throwing it all in one thing.
I totally agree with that. And they made me go first, and I thought we were talking about speaker processing.
Well, I've already given my opinion on all three of them now. Well, at least two of them so far. So, but yeah, no, I mean, the Alan Heath D-Live system does exactly the same thing. And, there's a logic to being able to say, I don't need very many faders, but I need 300 channels, or I only need 64 channels, but I need handles on all of them. Like those are two completely different scenarios that have found myself in many, many times before. And being able to just go into the shop and go, I'll pull this surface and I'll pull this engine and I'll stick them in a truck and I'll go. Yeah, to me, it's a no-brainer. I think that the concept of the all-in-one console is kind of old school thinking. It's just sort of, the PM5D was introduced because everybody still had analog snake systems, and the 1D sold okay, but it was kind of expensive, and people, so they were like, okay, well, we'll put the processing in something that will still work with all your old analog crap. And I think we can officially go away from the whole all your old analog crap concept.
I would like to throw a wrench into that if I can.
No, I'm sorry. I've only been here for 3 minutes, and I refuse to be
I refuse to be silenced.
with. No, go ahead, Clive. What?
I've been in both situations using, desks with outboard DSP and desks with DSP built in. There's a couple of advantages to having the DSP in the desk. One is that somebody doesn't leave the essential brain behind in the shop when you go on a tour. And number two is that the surface that goes with the brain costs just as much as the all-in-one desk. And if you want lots of faders or small number of faders, well, it's 2 desks or 2 surfaces. What's the difference? Except no brain. And then number 3, it's a hell of a lot less weight to carry around.
Well, the last one I'm gonna disagree only. Anyway, this is based on an extremely small sample set, but until literally, I think today, I had a D-Live and a CL5 sitting in my house. So I had this, 2 very similar systems that were literally illustrating these 2 things. And the D-Live system, I think total weight, someone's going to look this up and prove me wrong, but is probably less.
You can fly with a D-Live system. You can fly. You fly with the brain and the console and put it in as luggage.
And it's been many years since anybody expected me to lift anything.
Well, and there is that as well. But your points are, I mean, and your points about cost are completely valid. I think that I keep referencing the D-Live system because I wasn't, like I said, was in my house, but I think that the big surface and the big mix rack cost similar amounts of money. So just getting the thing with the knobs and the buttons and the screens on it is just as much money as the thing that's actually doing all the audio and stuff. So yeah,
but it's more expensive for the R&D of the manufacturer to R&D out the controller and the brain versus one CPU running everything. I bet.
Is it? Then why is the Allen Heath so much cheaper than everything else?
They already had a design, maybe.
I can answer that. It's because their surface sucks. And
this is going live to YouTube, by the way.
Is this why it's not in your house anymore?
They may be calling you tomorrow to ask for their surface back, Brian.
Let me expound a little bit, but no, I mean, and quite honestly, some of it is just they specifically set out to design a system that costs less money, and therefore, they designed a control surface in as inexpensive a way as they could that still provided the features that it needed to provide. And I can respect that. And I shouldn't have said actually what I said. What I really meant was it's inexpensive because they designed it to be inexpensive. Cost was a major design factor when they put the thing together.
I'm still not seeing it on any riders, Brian. It's not.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing is you let Brian go to Japan for a month and then suddenly his filter's gone.
No, you wake up Brian, and put him on a freaking camera 5 minutes after he wakes up, and
before his first copy.
He forgets. Yeah, I'm working on it.
Plus, he's in the land of Yamaha, so he has to say that about.
Exactly.
If he wants out of the country, he has to say that.
Yeah, and as much as I love Japan, I want out of the country. So yeah.
Do they check all your social media on the way out? Just different than like Russia and all the other countries.
I haven't found out yet, but we will see what we will see. So hopefully they will let me out, because I should actually be hanging out with y'all next week from my house, which will be a really nice change of pace. So
good for you.
So you're not working the loadout?
Well, I am working the loadout.
Gloves.
I am actually working the loadout. I actually so closing ceremonies are in 2 days.
Oh,
Yeah, but
days
it's probably
counting
cut the ends off the cable and leave it behind.
A lot of it is that. Well, and actually, all kidding aside, the Paralympics is right after us, so a lot of the stuff stays.
In Barcelona, we had that exact problem. We were staying for the Paralympics, so we labeled all of our cables "Do not remove cable" because they were striking other stuff. And
I don't think we labeled them enough.
yeah, when the crew came back to get ready for the Paralympics, the cable was all still run, but the connectors had all been cut off.
Worse than that, we had a 11 channel multi run around the entire stadium, and they cut it up into 100-foot pieces.
And on that note, we have to end this thing and end the live stream anyway. So
Note on that in a minute, Pete. Stay on.
yeah, we'll just hold that idea, hold that story. Brian, thank you for joining us. It's been a great conversation without you.